Okay, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about a phenomenology of the senses. And what I want to do is to talk about the different contributions of each of the senses, to try to address the different spatio-temporal character of each of the senses, and then hopefully in there to try to get some handle on the differences between sight and hearing and touch. Now, before I go into a phenomenological description and a series of examples of some of the spatio-temporal differences of the senses, I want to really stress that I don't think, for the most part, we parcel out the contributions of each sense. In our lived experience, the lived body integrates all of the different contributions, and we synthesize this, for the most part, without even really realizing it. And that's, I think, that's part of the reason why I want to shoot the videos. I hear a lot of people sometimes say the word empirical, and they say, well, what's available to the senses? Well, the word empirical, or the word available to the senses, is just too simple. It's more complicated than that, because sometimes the senses themselves give very different spatio-temporal bearing depending upon which sense we're talking about. Are we talking about sight? Are we talking about touch? Are we talking about hearing? Now, I think that said, we do integrate all of these into our body, and the task then is to try to identify what are some of the key differences between touch and sight and hearing. I think the first thing that I would want to say is that it will perhaps sound radical at first pass, but touch has no possibilities. Touch itself is without any possibilities. It's the sense of pure actuality. Touch only allows you to touch where you're actually touching. If I have a cube, my hand can grope around at it, and as I'm groping around at it, I'm able to touch wherever I am, but the sense of possibilities that I have for touch come from the sense of sight, which can see the places that I either haven't yet touched or have already touched, right? So I think one of the differences there with touch is that touch does require an engagement, a commitment, an actual presence of where you're holding it, and it allows an additive, accumulative sense of some object. There's an adumberation of profiles, and you get a sense of it by retaining and awaiting in your touching. But it doesn't have any possibilities. Again, touch is a world of pure actuality. Now, the world of sight, the field that comes through the sense of sight, seems so different than this. Sight gives a sense of permanence in a way somewhat that touch does. It registers a world of permanent objects, and in that sense, sight gives a sense of the inert, the lifeless, and the dead. Now, I think someone would want to say, oh, well, that's not really true. I mean, look, when you look at vision can show movement and change. Well, that's true, but vision also gives a kind of permanence in a way that sound doesn't. Now, take this object. As I move this object through space, even though the thing changes its position in space, it remains unchanged despite the fact that it changed location. So there's some sort of recognition of permanence amidst change, and that's registered in the vision of, in the sense of sight. Walter Ong, in some way, I think, very creatively addresses this issue of the lifeless and the inert, and how sight gives it whereas sound does not. He says that you can see a dead elephant, and that you can touch a dead elephant, and you can even smell a dead elephant, but if you hear an elephant, you better look out. Now, I think what he's suggesting is that sound opens us to the world of eventfulness and to the world of activity and action. Sound separates from its source. And so because sound separates from its source, it doesn't have the same perspectival character that vision does. Now, notice here, when I was touching this, I had to touch it a little bit at a time. Now, vision, I'd actually rotate the object and change my angle. And if you could see here, we have a Yoda and a Darth Vader that are going through there. And as I change my perspective, as the object itself rotates, I'm able to see a different profile that's there. Now, sound doesn't really allow you to hold a sound still, to rotate a perspective on it. You can't ever hold a sound still and then vary it and then look at it from a different angle. Somehow sound is so evanescent. To hear is to have heard. and it doesn't allow a going back over possibilities the way that sight does. Now, sight gives a field of simultaneous objects, and those simultaneous objects allow for a wandering, glance and a wandering gaze that allows you to selectively attend something out. But that's quite different than the way that your ears can wander through the tapestry of an unfolding piece of music. Now, in that case, you can selectively attend to a particular instrument in a symphony, but the sound itself is fading and doesn't have a permanence that allows for a return to the same object. The sound is always eventfulness. I think one way to maybe clarify this notion of perspectivalness and the difference between sight and sound, I want to talk about an incident that happened when I was at a comedy club. I was there and I was sitting waiting for the comedian to come out, and an announcer had come up and was giving an announcement suggesting that people turn off their cell phones and to be quiet because the show was about to start. And just as this person was making the announcement, I sort of looked up and wanted to see who was talking, and a waitress was walking right past as this was happening, and she blocked my view. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. With her action right there, she can block my view, but really only my view. I mean, sight is so perspectival that you can really only block one person's view, I guess, at a time. But with sound, if someone were to make a really loud sound, they could disrupt the entire performance. And so that sound somehow surrounds and engulfs us in a way that sight does not. Sound is very different than sight. Sound somehow, again, because sound separates from its source, sound gives a sense of sometimes being unable to detect its location. When I see something, I see it over in the distance. When I hear something, it's always already intimately near. Right? Sound collapses differences. It liquidates the differences. That is, the distances between the thing heard and the sound are liquidated in the hearing, whereas when I look, I see things not only in the distance, but I see the intervening distance between me and the thing in the distance. I hope some of those things, I don't know if, there's certainly, we talk about it for much longer, but those are hopefully some ways to think about the phenomenology of the senses and the different spatio-temporal character of touch, sight, and hearing. Please, if any of this makes sense to you, shoot some other videos and help people try to understand some of the differences there. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.